Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. Dealership said sue, so I did. This all started December of last year and just finished last week. So bought a car from one of those buy here and pay here places. I love the car. It's a Mazda 5 from 2014, basically the smallest minivan I've ever seen. Well, on Christmas we drove to some family for dinner and celebration. When we went to leave, the car would not start. We checked everything and found out the horn wasn't even connected, any fuse that wasn't absolutely needed was simply missing, and the tires were original tires. Beyond that, we hooked up to the computer and it read several errors, but the one getting in the way was the immobilizer. I had never known the van had one. I called AAA and set up towing, but because we were in the middle of nowhere, AAA couldn't get a tow truck to us under our membership, free, so we had to call a tow truck and then submit the bill to AAA after the fact. So family let us borrow their car and the van was towed to a shop. A few days later, and the shop calls and tell us what's wrong. I live in Texas, a single-party consent state, and I record all my calls thanks to an app on my phone. The long list if car issues isn't important. The point of this van is a basic work van. The only issue they found stopping it from running is the immobilizer is active and they can't touch it without talking to the dealer. I three-way called the dealership and the shop and we talked for 17.43 minutes. During this call, the dealership acknowledged we were not behind and everything should be working unless it malfunctioned. The dealership also gave permission for the shop to bypass it and we would be reimbursed the towing and repairs. All the shop needed to do to get the van running was bypass the immobilizer, and a couple days later we picked up the can and paid the bill. Both bills came to just under $300 and we started calling the dealership. The first few conversations go well and the phone rep seem interested in helping. But mostly I end up getting tossed around from department to department and then disconnected. That went on for some time and I of course took to Reddit to find out options. As almost always happens, Reddit users know some crazy facts and how to get stuff done. So I followed their advice and kept calling, eventually getting to a supervisor, and the first supervisor said he'd get it taken care of and we ended the call. 2 more days go by and nothing is heard. So I call back, get tossed around, and then get another manager who says we are not responsible for mechanical issues and hangs up. I call back now quite annoyed and eventually get back to the same manager. I explain I have all the information and call recordings including the repair shop three-way call. He cuts me off and says, "What, are you going to take us to court over $296.47? I don't think so, but go ahead and sue. We will win, and if that small amount is worth suing to you, you probably don't have the resources to actually sue." This of course made me quite upset. So off to a justice of the peace and explain what's happened. They give us a small claims form and explain the process. We can fill it out and pay for a constable to serve the dealership, or fill out the paper and take it to the dealership unfiled and explain everything to a manager in person. We chose the cheaper route because the manager on the phone was right, we didn't have the money to have it served, only filed. So we transcribed the phone calls. Found out how to fill out the paper. The hardest part was finding the agent. We didn't know what that meant, but we again turned to Reddit and learned. We gathered the bills and all the paperwork and made our way to the dealership's payment center. I wait in line and see the name of the manager is the same as the manager on the phone that told me to sue. I wait in line, and when it's my turn I ask to talk to John and he comes over and sits across from me. After making introductions and I confirm it's the same guy, I start to explain the situation again. As I'm explaining, I see when he recalls talking to me on the phone. Say starts to dismiss me and I explain that he asked me to sue and I'm here with all my evidence and the unfixed suit. Giving him one final chance. He starts to look over the papers and asked if I still had the recordings. I said yes, I could email him a copy. We sit and talk for about an hour as he reads, then I sat with a slight aggravated tone. If something isn't done today, not only am I going to head right back to the courthouse and file, as well tack on as much for emotional distress and whatever else the clerk hinted at. The clerk was very open-mouthed with ideas, as well as send a copy of everything to every email on the corporate website. At this, our conversation drew the attention of a woman in a power suit who rushes over for a recap. I find out she's John's boss's boss, and she's none too happy about how far things have gone. She assured me that all would be made right and gave me her cell number and email. I gave her the papers and left. The next Monday at 8 a.m. I got a call asking if credit being applied to the account would be acceptable. I say yes and she explains they will credit $500 to the account as payments. The payments are only $155 every 2 weeks. I agree and we talk for a few minutes when I ask why it took this much just to get things done. She laughed and said it shouldn't have and certain people are no longer employed at the company. Well, today was Wednesday and the day of the payment, but when I went to make the payment it was already done. Thank you, power suit lady. Next story. You're capping commissions on our most in-demand vehicles because you're not doing any extra work, so you shouldn't get extra money? Fine. Let's see how that works out for you. Back in 2014, I was selling cars. Ford, specifically. For all those who aren't car buffs, both the Mustang and F-150 were getting ground-up redesigns for 2015, and Ford had just announced that there would be no Shelby Mustangs or Raptor F-150s for 2015. Instantly, we were fielding several calls a day about these vehicles, and almost overnight, the inventory we had came with a $10,000 to $20,000 market adjustment due to demand. Our GM loved both vehicles and traded for them whenever he could because he loved chatting about them with buyers, so we had 21 Raptors and 6 Shelbys still on the lot when I sold a ruby red Raptor extended cab at $10,000 over sticker the last week of the month. Both are crazy numbers for the less than 200 new cars we sold/MO. With the trade, I was due about $4,200 in commission, but my check was about $1,700 light. Come the first Saturday morning meeting after payday, we were told that commissions on such vehicles would be capped at $2,500, retro to last month, per a previously ignored provision in our pay plan. There was much grumbling, but management stood firm, citing how incredibly easy Raptor or Shelby deals were. They weren't wrong about that. There was no such thing as a test drive until the deal was done. You could absolutely drive the car before you bought it, but only after we had a signed buyer's order, credit app, and the deal had been submitted and approved. They were generally in and out in under 45 minutes, if not half an hour. But still, dealership gets free money and doesn't want to share? Cue malicious compliance. I talked to several other salespeople who to a man were pissed, and we colluded. I whipped up a little Excel macro or widget that would take the invoice price or holdback, add and pack and whatnot, and spit out a sales price that would produce an exactly $2,500 commission. I sent it to every salesperson we had, and everyone used it. It only took 3 signed buyer's orders with seemingly arbitrary numbers for the desk to figure out what we were doing and to call another meeting. That meeting was basically management yelling at us, and the entire sales staff calmly saying, "Remove the cap, or you'll never see another signed buyer's order that exceeds it." F you. The cap was lifted 3 days later. Next story. Told to change one student's grade, so I changed them all. I moved to a new state to take a high school teaching job in a rural town. I liked my fellow teachers and almost all my students, but this was a small town with the usual assortment of outsized attitudes. One student was particularly lazy. Her parents both worked in the small school district, admin at the HS, teacher at the MS. She rarely turned anything in on time, and what was turned in was generally rushed or incomplete as if she'd gotten the instructions secondhand. Somehow, though, she had straight A's in all of her classes. I quickly figured out why. When she turned in another late, incomplete assignment, and I very generously gave it a D, her overall grade in class dropped to a B. I was called in the next day to a meeting with the principal and both of her parents, who immediately complained I was being unfair and capricious with my grades. They accused me of not giving students the instructions, so I showed them the instruction paper which I passed out and went over in class. They accused me of not giving her specifically a copy, but I remember handing it to her and I told them why. She was making out with her boyfriend when I was trying to go over the instructions. They didn't like hearing that part, lol. They accused me of not being clear with the deadline, but it was the second line of the directions. They accused me of not fairly grading her work, but when I showed them her work, they clearly hadn't seen it before and wondered whether I'd gotten assignments mixed up before I showed them her name on it. The principal asked me to change the grade in the gradebook. I asked about whether she'd have to redo the assignment first, but that was declined by her parents. I understand why my principal caved. It wasn't worth trying to fight 2 employees in a small, rural district already struggling to recruit people. So I went back to my classroom and changed every student's grade to a 100 in the gradebook. No special treatment. Even the ones who hadn't turned in a single thing got a perfect score. The fallout. Many students asked me why their grade changed, but I never addressed it. I would just brush them off by saying not to worry about it, though clearly rumors were spreading like wildfire in the small school, because even the secretary and the principal asked me about it later on. I only said that yes, I changed her grade. The principal looked like he wanted to ask me about why I changed all the grades, but he just shrugged and walked away. He never interfered in my grade book after that. The student's parents transferred her out of my class and her boyfriend also transferred a day later. No more PDAs in my class, finally, so no complaints. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.